Okay, so now we're going to talk about poly modeling a little bit more. There's a few more techniques I want to show in this demonstration, which is a function under the Extrude tool for keep faces together. And then I want to show how to select similar here. And so basically it's just going to be a demo where I walk through how to create a more complex table-like object using the poly modeling tools that we've seen before here. So it's I have all my layers here, so you can look at the last demo on this where I took all my layers here and I added them onto this visibility layer. And so just turn them off so we can kind of clear out the scene, and it'll give us a way to kind of work on this table without all that other stuff getting in the way. So again, just look at the last D2L video if you don't or you're having trouble remembering how to do that. So for this demo here, I'm going to be working under the modeling toolkit, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull that up before getting going here. And you remember you can find that over here under modeling standard. And so, one moment. Okay, so to get started, I'm going to start by creating a polycube. And I'm just going to move it above the grid there. And so just create the polycube and then go over to the attribute editor to the third tab from the right. So with the cube selected, attribute editor, third tab that says polycube 1. And right here, I am going to just divide this up into a certain scale. Let's see here. So we could hypothetically, we could hypothetically just scale it up this way. But for this, I kind of want to use these sliders over here. And keep in mind that this grid is in centimeters here, but it's okay to work a little small. So I'm just going to make it 20. Height at 1 is fine. And then the depth I'm going to keep at 15. So 20 by 15 here. And then now, under subdivision width and depth, I'm going to change those to correlate. So 20 subdivisions along the width, and then 15 along the depth. And you'll see here that that kind of keeps things proportional. I just kind of want it to be a bunch of squares here. And it doesn't have, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just kind of an easy way to kind of dial that in rather than doing it by eye here. So once that's done, I'm going to just scale this up from the center. And the first thing I'm going to do is get back to my modeling toolkit. We're kind of done with the attribute editor now. We're going to start extruding and doing some things like that. And so at this point, the attribute editor for modeling purposes on this object are not useful anymore. If we kind of change the attributes from this point on, it'll behave strangely. So I'll just right click and go to faces. And then I'm going to select one of these outer faces and then shift, double click the next face over. And so that should select all the outer faces there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to create like a chambered, lots of holes kind of going into this table. Whoops. And if it ever deselects like that, you don't have to go back and reselect everything. If you just press edit undo, it'll find your selection again. So I'm going to go down here to extrude in the modeling toolkit. So press extrude. And so from here, what we want to do is keep faces together by default is set to on. And so with keep faces together, you see how all the faces there stay together when they're selected like that. So we want to turn that off. And so I'll just do that by holding my cursor over the words keep faces together. Click, it'll turn yellow and there should be a cursor that goes left to right. And just turn that light switch from on to off. And so now what I want to do is I don't want to grab the arrows. I want to grab the box next to the arrow along the arrow that's going along the surface right there. I want to just grab the box and I want to scale it in and see how these negative space areas right there are still gray. So if you're dragging it that way, where it's creating these alias kind of things, and it's extending out, that just means you drag the box the wrong way. So just drag it in so that they come in like that. So we just drag that box right there. And now we'll just drag this vertical box to pull them in this way. And now we have these new set of faces that are just going along the surface. So now the next thing I want to do is I just want to press Q to get out of extrude. That's a habit that I always get into, is once I'm done with an extrusion, I just press Q or press the select button to get out of it. And so now what we want to do is we want to extrude again, because we kind of created these faces right here that my cursor are currently selecting, but the object still looks flat. If we were rendered, it'd still look like a plain rectangle. So we just need another extrusion here to kind of add the new shapes in. So I'll press extrude again, and all I'm going to do this time is, and I don't have to worry about keep faces together for this, we can just leave that, is I'm taking the blue arrow this time, not the square, but the arrow, and just dragging it in, and make sure that, that I don't bring them in too far. I don't want this face overlapping with that face. So I'll just bring it in like that. Sometimes the X-ray view, so I go to shading and then X-ray right here, can help you see how you're doing on that front. You see here that we're doing okay. So, and again, all I did on this extrusion is I just did that arrow right there by the, what's the blue box for me, that's kind of pushing it inward. And it pushed them all inward at the same time here. I'll press F to focus in on everything. And now I'll press Q to get out of extrude, because I'm done extruding there. And I'm just going to bring this back out of X-ray by going to shading, X-ray, bring that back. And so when modeling this way, I almost never want like real hard edges here. Even if you want it to be a hard edge, I would still recommend just continuing to bevel in order to, or add geometry in order to kind of smooth things out, because no object in reality is 100% like that, unless it's, you know, or most objects I should say. And so all these faces are still selected right now. And so we could just press bevel and just kind of adjust the fraction and the segments here. Something like 4 segments is okay. And that'll create a bevel within the scene there. And so when it comes time to render it, that'll just be a much more realistic look to it there. So I'm gonna so do those steps. But here's something I want to demonstrate, and I'm going to back out. You don't need to back out, but I'm going to back out here for a sec just to demonstrate something. So I backed back out to the point where I had extruded all these faces, and I pulled them in so that they kind of go into the geometry like that. Let's say that I deselected here by mistake, and I can't go back and select all those faces again. So what I've been showing you before to select multiple faces at once is this technique where you click a face, you hold down Shift, you double click, and it creates an edge loop like that of faces. But if I want to select all of these faces like this, and then a Shift double click, it doesn't work, right? It kind of doesn't do what we want. So that Shift double click isn't helping us here for if I want to select all these faces going around like that. And so there's an easy way to do this, which is I'll just hold down Shift and select 3 or 4 of the faces that I want and kind of the pattern that I want to be selecting them. And then just go up to the top, the 4th over from the left is Select, and then Select Similar. And so what Select Similar does is Maya computes what it interprets, what it thinks you're trying to do here. And so select similar, and you'll see there that it selected all the right faces that we want. And so here, we can just continue to do that step that we were doing earlier, which is press bevel and change the fraction and segments to what we want. Okay, so that was select similar right there. And so now the next thing I want to do is I want to bevel the bottom of this table. So if I were to do that right now, the bevel would come out a little bit strangely because of the way these edges are kind of coming together. So normally you want edges to come together to a vertex. So you want one vertex and you want kind of 4 edges kind of coming into it. Right here we have this vertex and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going into it. And so what that'll do is when we create a bevel, there'll just be some weirdness along each of these little star parts here. So the bevel will just kind of come in and it'll just like dip in and dip in and dip in and it'll just look a little weird. So the way to fix that is we need to extrude all these bottom faces down and then bevel from there. So I'm gonna right click, go to faces mode. And so what I want to do is I want to select all of these bottom faces. So you could just go in and one by one select like that until you get them all, but we can see that would take a while. So there's 2 ways that we can do this. So the first way is I'll select maybe 6 or so of the faces that I want to select, and then I'll go over to this top one and go to select similar, and you'll see it selected all those faces. However, it also selected a bunch of these top faces. And so the fix here is super easy, is we just spacebar and then go to the front view, the front orthographic view. You can also get there by pressing this button right here. And now I'm just going to hold down Control, the deselect button, right? And then I'm just going to drag my cursor to create a box, holding down Control the whole time, and just deselect the top faces. And now we have all the bottom faces selected. So just to show that again, I'm just going to right click, go to faces, hold down Shift, select 6 or so faces, make sure I didn't select anything by mistake, or anything else by mistake. Go up here, select similar, then go to the orthographic view, then hold down Control and drag to deselect the top faces. So that's a quick way to select the bottom faces. The other way we could have done that is we could have done it all in the orthographic view. So the other way would be to right click, go to faces, just drag, select all the faces like that, and then same thing, just hold down Control and deselect, and just kind of be careful how you drag it because there's more faces we need to deselect now. So get as close as you can and deselect, and you'll select the faces that way. So just to recap that way again, is if I want to select all the bottom faces here, is I just go to the orthographic front view or the side view and right click, go to faces, select them all, then hold down Control for deselect, and then drag down and deselect the top ones. And now you'll see that we have the bottom faces selected, but none of the top ones. And if you do that second technique I showed you, you just need to zoom in on this a little bit and make sure that no strays kind of came in, because even if one face is selected like this by mistake, when we extrude this next time, it's going to come out looking problematic. So, and I'll just demonstrate that here. You see that? So even with just one face selected the wrong way, things can go pretty wrong here. And so just make sure to kind of double check your work because of that. And that's indicative of this whole modeling process in Maya, is that these steps that I'm showing you all are very easy, I think, if you kind of zoom out and get some practice with it. The trick is to get to a point where when you're doing these steps, faces aren't getting selected by mistake like stray ones there and messing up the project. It's important to kind of keep it clean as you go throughout. And because of that reason, I often recommend just saving incrementally as you work. So just, save as, and just kind of numerically, incrementally, just save your work as you continue to go here. So what I want to do with all these faces selected is I'm just going to go down to Extrude, press Extrude, and then all we're doing is the vertical arrow down. So that blue arrow for me is just bring it down vertically. You can bring it down a little bit or a lot. It's down to your preference. And I'll just press Q after I dragged it down vertically. I didn't do any other steps. And so now with all those faces selected, I'm just going to bevel again. So next to Extrude, we'll press Bevel. First, I'll drag the segments, the fraction to do the scale of the bevel, then segments to add some geometry in there. And right now for this model, I'm not planning on smoothing this at all to add more geometry. So I'm using these bevels and these extrusions to kind of build out the final model at the first crack of it here. So let's say that I want to bevel these edges right here to kind of create a softer edge right there for these shapes. So what I would do in that instance is I would select those 4 outer edges, and I press 4 to just double check. So go to wireframe and double check and make sure that I didn't select anything else by mistake. Press 5 to go back. And so with those 4 edges selected, I'm going to go to Select, Similar, and you'll see here when we zoom out, it selected all those outer edges of all these faces here. So it's actually really simple to select, hundreds of faces here at the same time. And so again, it's just these outer edges right here. So it's just 1, and I press focus too as I work just to bring my camera in closer. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Press F so that when I toggle around, it stays on them. Press 4 to see the wireframe preview to make sure no strays were selected there. Press 5 to go back to normal view. So it's just that I described a lot of steps there, but just these outer 4 edges. Go to Select, Similar, and all those outer edges get selected, and then I'm just going to bevel again here. And these bevels are just done, since we're not working from a reference this time, the way that you bevel these are entirely up to you in terms of the scale that you want to go for. For all these on mine right now, I'm going pretty minimalistic here. So I'm doing small fractions with lots of segments there, or a decent amount of segments, something around 5. So whenever I'm done with beveling or extrusion, I press Q to get out of it. And I'm going to add more geometry to this table now. So I am going to right click, go to faces, and so now I'm going to extrude the top of this table. So same thing as we did for the bottom. We're going to select about 6 faces or so right there. Go up to select similar. Let's see here, right there. And you'll see some faces from the bottom got selected as well. So we'll just need to go to the orthographic view to deselect them. Don't deselect these from the perspective view, because you're going to, it's almost assured that you're going to go in and you're going to, because even the pros will do this if you do it from the perspective view. If you go in and you try to deselect there, you're going to deselect some of these from the top by mistake. So the orthographic view is just way better for this. So we want to deselect those faces, go over to the front view, hold down Control, deselect there, and you'll see that now we just have the top faces selected right now. And I'll press Extrude to extrude again. It'll take a moment to think about it. And all I'm doing here is I'm just pulling this up vertically a little bit. Okay, press Q. I just pulled that vertical arrow up to bring it out. And so now I want to create the lip to the table. So I'm going to press, with all those faces still selected, I'm going to press Extrude again. And this time, I'm just going to drag the oh, whoops. So if I drag the offset up, I always forget this, it goes in, but we want to drag the offset to a negative value to pull it out. So you can also type this in numerically. And you'll see here that some of these faces are overlapping for this. When you pull out faces, that's normal, and this next step is going to fix that. So I'll press, and so all I did is I just extruded those top faces, and I just adjusted this offset slider to a negative value to bring out that lip. And now I'm going to press Q to get out of that. And without deselecting anything, I'm just going to go to extrude again. I'll take a moment to think, and then just with that vertical arrow, going to pull it up. And now we have the main base table shape. So I'll press Q to get out of it. And here, I want to create two different styles of bevels for the top and the bottom. So if we want the bevel to be the same on the top and the bottom, we could just select a faces edge loop right here, press bevel once and bevel, and it'll bevel equally on the top and the bottom. But in this case, I want the top and the bottom to be different. So I'm going to right click, go to edges rather than faces, and select an edge, shift, double click the next edge to select an edge loop going all the way around. And I'm going to bevel. And this time, I'm going to start by adding some segments, so something like 5 or 6. And this time, the depth, which is underneath it, if the depth is always a value of either -1 to 0 to +1. And if you go beyond that in any direction, it's just going to compute to -1 to 1. So if you type in 5 under depth, it's still just going to be the same as if you typed 1. And if you type in -10, it's going to be the same as if you pressed the depth of -1. And so 1 is a bevel, like what you would imagine a normal bevel to be, kind of rounded out like that. If we type in 0, it's going to be linear. So it'll just kind of go in like that. So it kind of took, it was originally beveled out like this. Then if you type in 0 or go to a value closer to 0, it'll start to flatten out like that. And now if we do -1, it's going to be the inverse of the original bevel. So it'll kind of create a inverted bevel like that. And so sometimes with tables and stuff like that, carpenters will do that style of bevel. So that can become helpful a lot of the time here. So for that bottom shape, I'm going to use that kind of bevel. And I might take the fraction of this and adjust it slightly. Oops. My computer's lagging a little bit, which is making that difficult. So I'm just going to do I'll go back to 0.7. Press Q or the select button to get out of it. And similar step is that I'm just going to select an edge loop on the top now. And I'll shift and double click. And this time, if you can see here, it only selected one set of sides here, but it didn't select these others. So that'll happen sometimes. So you could try to select similar, but I find that it's easier that I just double click, keep holding down shift and double click on this one. It'll select, now we have all these edges and all these edges selected. And this will just kind of come up as your objects get more complicated. So shift double click on that one, and then one last one. Shift double click here. And now I'll just do the same thing. I'll press focus to get in here. And I'll bevel again. And I'm pressing, so I changed the bevel settings there, and when I'm done, I'll press select to back out of it. So now we have most of our table here. So one last thing I want to show on this table, and see, this will render a lot nicer here. Just with these bevels in here, it's going to go a long way in terms of just when we do like a nice render on this, just bringing up the realism and just making these things not look like a Nintendo 64 game, right? So I'm going to go back to that technique I showed before, the multi-cut tool, and I'm just going to add in like a extruded bevel going along this kind of surface right here. So detail is just always going that little extra mile with the detail and modeling. Just always just really pays off in the end with when we start putting the lighting and all that stuff on the objects. The detail comes through and the projects just come out much better here. So just a little more detail on this one. So under the modeling toolkit, towards the bottom left, there's this multi-cut tool, which I showed in previous lessons here. It's the X-Acto knife with the 3 orange dots and lines there. So I'll just make sure I'm in object mode. You can do this in other modes, but object mode works best for me. So I'll press multi-cut tool, and by default it'll do this, where you can click on the edges or on the vertices to manually draw in extra geometry along the lines. And so the edges will turn red if you want to drag it to an edge, and then if you drag it to a vertex, the vertex will turn red. And then when you're done, you press return, and it creates both the edges right there as well as vertices on the connection points. So I'm just going to edit undo, because I'm going to do the other function of this tool, which is if you press the multi-cut tool and then you hold down Control, so that same button that we use a lot to deselect things. It's kind of like your alternate button a lot of times in Maya. So I'll hold down Control and just drag it so that if you drag it on a vertical edge, it'll go perpendicular to it. So same, if I held it along a horizontal edge, it'll go vertical. So hold down Control and I just click and it goes in, and I'll do the same thing, hold down Control and then click again, and I'll just take a second on my computer. All right, so we just have that new geometry in there, and what I'm going to do is make sure that I'm in faces, which it already is. I'm going to select a face here, and then Shift, double click, and select an edge loop here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an extrusion that comes out uniformly. So I'm going to press Extrude, and unlike before, I am going to keep faces together because I want these faces to stay together. And for this, I want it to come out uniformly. So because of that, I'm not going to use these arrows right here for this. If I pull out the arrows, oops, it can get a little hairy on these. So the arrows are not what we want to do. Sorry, my computer's acting real slow here, but you can see when you use the arrows to extrude out in all directions like this, you'll just kind of get some weirdness in some areas like that where I'll do some things like that. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to back all the way out to where I was before. I'm going to extrude, and I'm going to, with the thickness, just pull the thickness out. And I pulled the thickness out way too far here, but you can see that using this thickness slider right here, and again, I just clicked on the word thickness and dragged left to right, holding down my left mouse button. And I'll just type in a better value here. You can create a uniform extrusion here. Okay, so that's what I want. So again, I just selected all those faces, extruded, and then only messed with the thickness slider here. Didn't mess with the arrows or anything else. So press Q to get out of extrude. And so with those faces still selected, I'm going to bevel so that it bevels both on the top and the bottom equally here for this. So, oh, whoops, wrong button. So undo. Oops. Okay, so I pressed the wrong button there, so I just I pressed edit undo to kind of get out of that. So bevel, and same thing as we've been doing, just adding some segments. And with the fraction we can scale it up to get something more rounded, or we can go small to get something more subtle. So for this, I kind of want it to be rounded, so I'm going to do 0.9, press Q to move out, and so there we have it. So we can use these modeling techniques I showed. You know, I'm doing this to kind of create just a slightly, you know, like a more ornate table here. But these techniques, like particularly these keep faces together, for those, remember when we extruded these as one of the first steps to kind of build out this kind of chambered look there. You can use that same technique to kind of create like gears, all kinds of objects. And again, I think I talked about this in class, is that for our wine glasses that we're making before, if we wanted the wine glass that we used creating NURBS to look more ornate, we could, like we wanted to be like a chalice or something like that, we could use this technique with the extrude, keep faces together off to create some ornamental kind of decoration going around it. And that technique just kind of comes up over and over and over again. So getting really good and comfortable with the process that we showed in this demo here is going to open up a lot of doors to modeling a lot of different objects.